This is a project I took because I walked past this for the last 20 years and was puzzled by what I could and could not make out. I also came to write an article for the Hackney Terrier when I became the editor, because as editors you all may know that it's very difficult sometimes to get enough copy. So I then extended my job as editor of the Terrier and Hackney History for that matter by writing an article about this, and this is based on that article. So I'll take you through the panel in this order, and by the end of the day I hope to be able to explain why the Duchess does not actually ever visit Stoke Newington, but there's no reason not to perhaps celebrate her nonetheless. If you were standing at the corner of Garnham Street in the early 20th century, this is what you would see. It's a very fine Victorian building. It's been crenellated on the ground floor. There are some very, very fine ironwork, the lamps from both the public lamp, but also the lamps that dependent from the first floor. But you can also see further down an electrical supplier, which was originally a blacksmith, and beyond it, houses which no longer exist since the redevelopment of that particular street. What you can see, however, very clearly is the panel that we're going to talk about. It's tin faience, it's a very fine piece of work, and as we'll get closer into it, this is very smudgy. This is my taking a screen capture from that. But you can see that in the early 20th century, it was actually very clear, very well delineated, and you could read the text at the bottom without too much difficulty. We'll take it forward one. This is what it looks like now. Rather faded, some areas less faded than others. So you can make out a number of the figures, but it does take some scrutiny to get that far. Fortunately, Aimer took photographs of it, and Nick Perry, through his technical skill on the computer, produced a rather better image of it, restoring some of its colours. And you can see it was actually a rather beautiful piece of Victorian tile work, predominantly in purple, greens, and browns, with a grey background, the housing fading into grey, so that the foreground is quite clearly delineated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the characters on the screen, so you have a better sense, thanks to Nick, of what these people looked like in the original state. This is the street itself. Start in the background and work to the foreground. It's a well delineated area. You can see how carefully the windows are done with bottle glass, sash windows open, the one on the left-hand side open. You can see this, a two-story building across it. You can see also, I'll come back to that in a minute, but you can see a lamp, a horseshoe upside down. My grandmother always said you had to hang horseshoes the other way or the luck would fall out of it. I'm not sure how this happens, but that's that. If you look around the corner into the room, you can see a piece of furniture. So there's an attempt to go for reality, some sense of realizing, what's the word I would use? Reality, yes. You can see the pantile roof, interlocking red sand, red clay tiles. You can see also the lamp that hangs over the street, and so detailedly has the artist done this that he's even provided, I assume it's a he, I beg your pardon, the artist has provided the rope and the pulley by which this lamp may be lowered to be relit or refueled. So we have that. On the street scene itself, the Duchess has arrived, of course, and the Duchess arrives in a coach. And we have this rather beautiful piece of 18th century coach building. It's got a spring, the spring you can see, the grey iron spring or steel spring, the steel or iron shod wheel. It's at an angle, as indeed our coach wheel would be. On the street above what is actually the Duchess's hat, you can see the name of the owner of the butchers, J. Jones. So very clearly it's not the Jolly Butchers. It's another scene altogether. However, we know it's J. Jones's shop. Below, of course, are the cobbles. Cobbles, not sets, cobbles, and the feet of the people. I show you this partly because I want to explain what the chips are. You saw the chips. How is it that the how is it that the panel has rather large grey sections of missing tilework? Amir has shown you the war damaged maps already. This is the one for Garnham Street, and you can see the light yellow colouring, which meant there was a minor bomb damage, and I can only assume that some of the chips come from that particular period and of minor damage caused by a bomb. There's nowhere else on that map which shows the spot of a bomb falling, so I don't know where the bomb was, but it seems to have done damage. Here we have the characters themselves. There are 10 in all, and I'm going to work my way through them, starting on the left-hand side, moving to the right-hand side, and finishing with the kiss. It's a lively scene, and thanks to Nick's coloration, it's quite clearly delineated now. But I'm going to start at the left-hand side. We have, hopefully you can see the red rectangle at the top, which identifies who I'm talking about. I thought this was a postilion till I looked up what the word postilion meant. And the postilion actually walks with his horses, whereas this is simply the coachman. I'm getting my glass of water. Thank you. So the first character we see is the coachman, very finely dressed in a green coat with a staff of office, I assume. So part of the Duchess's entourage. Next one down, we find two others of the Duchess's entourage. In the foreground, a very superior-looking man in a wig, carrying also a stave of office, I think, and behind him, a black figure who I assume is also, because of each of them is finely dressed in tricorn hats. These are the entourage that the Duchess would arrive with. And you can also see, by the way, the very heavily damaged sections of grey. Next along, the Duchess canvassed with either two or one other lady. Lady Concannon was her sister, who often went with her, but several degrees higher than that was the Duchess of Portland. And I'll come to talk about the Duchesses and politics later. So we assume this is the Duchess of Portland. She has, of course, mopping her brow with a rather fine lace handkerchief. Beside her is a boy whom I assume to be a local boy. He is not dressed at all well. He's bare-legged, barefooted, bare-armed. On the other side, avoiding the kiss for the moment, is this very stolid and rather formidable woman. In front of her is a chopping block and a very heavily embedded cleaver in the block in front of her. Behind her is a splayed carcass, clearly part of the trade. On the far right-hand side, we have two more butchers. We have a butcher who rather nonchalantly is sitting on one of the blocks. You see him on that one and here and here. And in his left hand, he carries a cleaver, rather dangerously since he's sitting cross-legged on a block. And in the other hand, and it's important for something that says later, he's also got a marrow bone, a leg in this case. But we come to the centre moment of this whole thing, which is the kiss. Here we are, this rather beautiful moment in the whole action. Very finely done. One of the things that distinguished the Duchess of Devonshire was that she was famous for her hats. And we'll see a portrait later by Gainsborough showing her in one of these hats. The butcher himself, you can see his lips protruding, waiting for the plumper. And he looks himself rather dashing and debonair with a spotted kerchief around his neck. So that's the scene itself. Those are the characters. That's what the picture looks like, the thing looks like. The pub was not always called the Jolly Butchers. It was originally called the Three Jolly Butchers, and this is the earliest document I've been able to find. It's an insurance policy, not for the Jolly Butchers itself, but it mentions the Jolly Butchers. It's a location indication showing where the houses that are being insured were located. But you can see near, only adjoining near the Three Jolly Butchers at Stoke Newington, and so on. So this is a 1781 insurance policy from the Sun Insurance Company. The name remained as the Three Jolly Butchers mainly throughout the 19th century. In 1834 it became the Jolly Butchers, and indeed in some of the other documents it's interchangeable. Sometimes the same document uses both names. Aren't there four butchers, I say? There's not. One has appeared. This is the one with the dangerous cleaver, sitting cross-legged, dangerously imperiling his own thigh. Here's the other one, his friend, both of them looking towards the Duchess. There's the one about to kiss. But what about her? Does she not count as a butcher? Obviously not. For some reason I can't possibly offer an explanation for. She does not count as a butcher, despite the fact that she has a chopping block, a leg of meat, and a cleaver. However, who knows why that might be the case. When was the panel mounted? That, of course, obviously depends on when the building was built, but we'll start there. If you look at the two maps here, these are the 25-inch maps for the area. In the 1870 map, you'll see there is no Garnham Street. There is, however, a Jolly Butcher's Yard, which I've arrowed with the red. And certainly by 1930, but a good deal earlier, by 1890, by the way, Garnham Street had been constructed. But you can see very clearly that the street when the Duchess would have visited Stoke Newington, had she visited Stoke Newington, she would not have found the Jolly Butchers as it exists now. That's the one thing one can say for absolute certainty. It was not there. Pubs get rebuilt. The bird cage up Stamford Hill is exactly the same. There are documents from the 18th century for the bird cage, which show it's existing in exactly the same space as it is now. So the Jolly Butcher's Yard was there in the 1870 map. Trying to narrow it down as to when this panel was put up, i.e. when the building was rebuilt, the lease was taken by Henry Hall, as you can see here, in 1877, expiring in 1898, for a fairly large sum of £1,500, plus the annual rate or rent of £184. Going forward, Richard Hall, his son, sort of agreed an indenture with the brewing company, And in the document it says, Richard Hall recently expended a considerable sum of money in and above the rebuilding and otherwise altering the premises now rebuilt. So I would say that the point at which one can say the building was certainly there, as we know it now, is 1890, but probably 5 or 6 years before that. So it's recently built. And I suspect that Richard Hall is the person responsible for the panel. He had his rent put up, by the way, which seemed rather unfair given he'd done all that work. On the back of that indenture, in fact, you can see the two plans, the before and after. So if you like, this is the pre-demolition site on the left, and this is the post-demolition site and the rebuilding on the right. And here's the block that I indicated as being the electricians, and just beyond it, in fact, the Northern Press. Now, we come to the general election of 1874, and this is partly recaps what Amir said earlier. Elections were not as they are today. Well, not entirely. We have the Duchess of Devonshire canvassing for the Jolly Butchers for their votes for Fox. So we have to find Fox, and we have to know who she is too, and what she's up to. We have Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, in her wonderful hat, famous hat by Gainsborough, and Charles James Fox. They were Whigs. The Duchess of Devonshire was allied with the Duchess of Portland. The Duke of Portland was Prime Minister for a while, and the two of them, Duchess of Portland and Devonshire, worked together in, one would say, liberal causes. And nobody was more active in liberal causes than Charles James Fox. He was an anti-monarchist, and not that he wanted to abolish the monarchy, but the king, George III, kept interfering in politics and trying to appoint his own prime ministers, which he did on a number of occasions. He was also out of favour because he wanted to try and control the East India Company, in which large numbers of the Tory and indeed the Whig nobility had money invested. So he wanted to regain some power from the king, and he also wanted to reform the governing of India. To help him along the way, he had the Duchess, and here we have liberty and fame. There's a great delight in abstractions in 18th century politics, and we have liberty and fame. You can see liberty carrying the Phrygian cap of liberty, soon to be actually used by Marianne in France to rather more bloody ends, and also we have fame with her trumpet ready to blast out the good news of liberty. Britannia holds out a wreath for the Duchess to wear on the top of her hat. Who knows? I think there's no room on her head for another thing. And the lion sits down there looking rather smug, I think. Charles James Fox, this is from the government website. They describe him as a gambling addict. I don't have to read it to you. There are certain recent foreign secretaries who you might perhaps think some of this might apply to one of our recent foreign secretaries. Not always, but there you are. It's your view, and it's mine too. So he was a man who was controversial, and they tried to keep him out of Parliament as much as possible, failing to do so. He was, again, this is again this love of abstraction. He fought for these noble virtues, all the noble virtues except Scotch politic. Now, I'm not sure if this is Scotophobia or not, but there was obviously a case that Scots were not welcome. I'm not sure why. The English didn't particularly hate to James I or James VI, but clearly they didn't. The prejudice remained. But here we have the shield of truth going forward. He was a noble orator, Demosthenes, and we have here his modest statement that he has no power to speak. Fellow citizens, I cannot find words. Well, that's the first thing one can disbelieve about him. He was not he was an object of some, as we saw in that government description, a philanderer, an immoral man in all sorts of ways in which one might think. Gambling, womanizer, debtor, dandy. There you are. However, he triumphed, and the ladies who got him that far, the Duchesses and Lady Concannon, carry him in triumph. He himself now has assumed the cap of liberty, and the trumpets, you can see, are being blazed out by the cherubim on the other side. 18th century elections. Amir talks about rotten boroughs, and that's the standard notion of what happens in English, and Scottish for that matter, politics in the 18th century. And it's true. Most boroughs were not rotten, but very highly controlled. There were some absolutely rotten boroughs. The most rotten of all was Old Sarum, which returned 2 MPs but had no population. But fortunately, the patron of that constituency was a certain William Pitt, who was, of course, soon to become Prime Minister with the right number of people in his party, because he could nominate 2 of them at least for this Old Sarum, which is just outside Salisbury. Even after the 1832 Act, which did extend the franchise to 40-shilling freeholders, men, there was still the riotous aspect of politics, which was that you made as much noise as you possibly could, and in this case, eat and swill, get bribed, basically, for your vote. How could you be bribed? Well, sorry, I'll come back to in a minute. Westminster, which was the constituency for which they were standing, was not a rotten borough. It had an 18,000 electorate. And the electoral polls were printed out street by street with the names of the valid electors. And you can see who they are, and we'll come to that in a minute, but you can also see the way they voted. So this is this is how the notion of private or secret ballots had yet to come into play. And you can see, in fact, that most people who voted for Fox voted only for Fox, and when they voted for somebody else, they voted for Rodney, but not for Lincoln. The hustings itself, you got your name checked, you swore on the Bible that you were that person, and you then put your mark, or you indicated for whom you wished to vote. Interestingly, in the background is the coach of Britannia collapsing. This is Hogarth. This is 1754. It's gone on. Taking you back, first of all, to 1780 election, just because I came across this, the polls were listed, in this case, parish by parish, and totted up at the very end. So here we have the 1780 run over 15 days. So if you were canvassing, you had a good chance of getting around a very large number of people to try and persuade them by one means or another, kissing or bribing, or maybe bribery is a kiss, I don't know. Kiss is a bribery. But 15 days in 1780. Not so in 1784, which is the election we're talking about for the Duchess of Devonshire. It took 40 days. It started on April the 1st of 1784 and went on for 40 days. And this novel came out in fact, contemporary 1784 novel, nothing like hot off the press. Hogarth again, after this is the winner being chaired home, but at the same time you see the violence going on. And this echoes something that happened at the time of the 1784 election itself. The opposition to Fox recruited or pretended to recruited sailors or dressed people up as sailors, provided them with cudgels, and sent them about their work to try and worry people into voting for the right person. The days were numbered. You could tell how the election was going bit by bit. The kiss itself. This is the origins of that kiss. In the newspaper, this is what is reported. The Duchess of Devonshire asked, cunningly disguised as D, asked a butcher for his vote. "I will give your grace a plumper," says the tradesman, "and procure you 5 more for a certain condition." "What is that?" "That your grace will give me a kiss." "Why then," says the charming Duchess, "take one." Okay. From that arose a whole series of announcements in the newspaper. This is a slur on the Duchess, saying, "I'd rather kiss my moll, I'd rather kiss my prostitute, my whore," says the sailor, no doubt one of the sailors who's also been involved in the cudgelling, than kiss her. So a good deal of vituperation went on. And again, linking the Duchess with the prostitutes of Covent Garden. She was a woman who read ancient Greek. She was a highly intelligent woman, but the grounds of attack were always based on the notion that a woman could not possibly take the position, and if she were, she was demeaning herself and being indecent. Some people leapt to her support. She is a patriot. And we come to the cartoons from the period, which are also clearly delineating the same story. This was actually produced on April the 3rd of 1784, again, currently done. A more intimate moment. You'll see that the Duchess carries in her hat a fox's brush as a sign of her loyalty or her thing. Here we have another one. Anyone can kiss the Duchess. It doesn't have to be a butcher, it could be a cobbler. This chap does not simple cobble, he worms dogs. The notion of sexual impropriety comes here, whereas the fox is ushered under her skirts for protection. And here we have the poll, the final poll, in which Fox came second. He was denied his seat for a year because they tried to keep him out of Parliament. Finally, the 3 Jolly Butchers, where did it come from? Richard Hall obviously did not know about Richard Hall presumably knew about the story and decided to draw it into himself. There were lots of pubs. There were 3 Jolly Butchers from Edmonton down to the city, 3 within Westminster itself. So I assume that the story of the Duchess had remained in some circulation, and that Richard Hall would presumably also have been willing to use the images that he could find from the period. If you want more information, I can recommend The Hackney Terrier and read my wonderful article there. And I wanted to finish off, however, with a song. You can join in if you like. This is using the tradition of John Gay's Beggar's Opera, taking a popular song and putting new words to it. And here we have In Praise of the Duchess of Devonshire.